your anxieties or considerations about the adaptation of this trilogy for you with the movies? And Neil, working with Veronica, was that inhibiting in any way, having the authors so plugged in to what the movie was going to be?
My anxieties, I think, are just the standard anxieties of any author who hands over their work to be adapted. But I also know, I mean, from the second the book hits the shelves, it stops belonging to the person who wrote it, and it starts belonging to everyone who reads it. So I was pretty well practiced in letting it go a little bit, which I think is a good thing, because there's no way that they can be exact replicas of each other, and they shouldn't be. They're different mediums, so that they should communicate in different ways. And so my anxieties were very much assuaged by the people I chose to hand it over to. And I had a lot of trust for them in the decisions that they would make. And I think it seems like that trust was well-founded since I loved the movie. So I'm really happy with the way it all turned out. But I think that's the key, is just, for me, was finding people that I trusted to respect the work and to love it and to do good things with it.
I mean, for me, the challenges for me were the same for Doug and Lucy, who started out developing the screenplay, was really fitting all of that story into a movie. And because we really loved the story and loved all the different characters and all the different events, but a movie is just a different beast in the book. She's written something that's 400 plus pages, and we're working with something that's 100 pages, and just has different needs, different dramatic needs. And so really the challenge was just fitting all that story that we loved, into it. And there are a lot of events in the movie, and they are compressed, and it has kind of a crazy pace because of that. And I think we really just decided to just get it all in there as best we could. And so the trick was to make that work.
And was it inhibiting at all? Because on your other movies,
Veronica's really unpleasant and it's and very intimidating. No, it was fantastic actually, because the world is in creating a world of the movie. There are so many questions that come up, and so to have the source right next to me or at the end of the phone, and to be asked, like, where do they use money? Where do they get, what do they do? What happened? And what happened 100 years ago, really? And what's also happening down the line? What's coming in the next? Because she hadn't finished writing the third book when I was prepping the movie, and so it was fantastic to be able to get an insight and to actually just hear what the truth was behind all of it, so that we made sure that all of our characters were on the right path in our movie.
Thank you.
Gina? Veronica, my question's for you. Sorry, I mispronounced your name. Can't speak today. I was going to ask you, the idea of this came to you, I think, when you were a freshman in college, and I would imagine that some of the ideas of this are from, when you're going into college, you have to take your SATs, and then you got to declare a major, and you got to say who you're going to be for the rest of your life when you're 18 years old.
Right.
So I'm just wondering, how those ideas came about. And secondly, we were talking a little bit before this about where are the arts people in these groups? Where are the creatives, the poets, the writers, the musicians? Where do they fit into this world?
Okay. No, I know where they fit in. I'm trying to remember your first question.
About the idea of college and
right.
continuing.
Okay, sorry. Lost it there. Well, really, I think that you have to choose at 16 thing is more of an emotional reality for young people than an actual reality, because obviously we know, when you grow older, that you can change your mind, you can change your career, you can, change your whole life. You don't have to pick it like that at 18. But when I was 16, I felt like I had to decide right now, figure out what classes you're going to take, make sure you get good grades, prepare your college application, pick your major, plan your whole life. And that felt very real to me, so I wanted it to be on the page. And that's why 16, not 18, because that was the age for me when it was why are people pressuring me to decide all this? As far as the artists go, each faction has their own form of artistry, I think, especially Amity and Dauntless. So Dauntless, tattoo artists, especially, although more in the book sense of the tattoos than the movie. and then Amity, of course, yeah.
This question is for Doug and Lucy, and Neil can even chime in a little if you'd like. One of the key aspects of this film is the fact that you have a meld of a small amount of CGI with a great amount of practical locations, practical sets. With a film of this magnitude, many directors and producers would have elected to go all CGI or more. What were some of your considerations in making the decision to go with practical locations and sets over the CGI?
The answer to that, which I'll turn it over to him in a second, was fully a Neil point of view. And from early on, when we started to talk about where we would shoot, as you know, everyone goes to the rebate city. And when you look at the finances, you're always saying, well, if you have $5 million more to put on screen, and Neil from the beginning made an impassioned argument that he had to shoot in a real place or it would feel like another computer world. And he made that argument so articulately that as you were looking at the $5 million rebate versus shooting in Chicago, he made the best argument that the creative value of shooting there would more than make up for whatever the financial loss was at not going to a different rebate place.
Yeah, my feeling was, how do you make it different? We've seen lots of movies set in the future, and dystopic and post-apocalyptic movies, and they often have some great CG cityscape that's kind of cool, and is a real, perhaps, visual effects achievement, but still always feels a little like, well, that's not really real. You know it's not real. And so I thought, well, how do we make this movie, one, different, and two, because it is so much about human nature, it's about Triss and all these characters and being very real with them, how do we make the setting real? And I thought, well, there's one solution will solve both those problems, and we shoot it in the real place. We shoot it in Chicago, which has a monumental skyline, and we use, if you figure that the city was mostly spared damage from the catastrophe that happened over 100 years ago, then the same way that New York looks pretty much like, you go downtown in New York, it looks like New York looked 100 years ago, plus or minus some glass building. I figured that Chicago might be the same 100, 200 years from now. And so it was just a way to make it look really different, and to keep it real, have the characters on the streets, the real sun in their eyes, interacting with real locations.
We also found the city so beautiful that when we came back with pictures and showed the studio, they could kind of only gasp themselves at how beautiful it was. And Veronica populated the book with so many landmarks of Chicago, and that did help ground, just make it seem accessible and make it seem, like Neil said, recognizable. And a funny thing happened to me, which is we had done such a good job of selling the studio how we had to be in Chicago because it was so real. And Doug and I were driving around Chicago the first day, and we passed the Ferris wheel. I said, oh my God, it looks just like the Ferris wheel as she described it. He turned to me and said, it is the Ferris wheel. So, and our actors really do climb the real Ferris wheel that she described it. And they weren't stunt doubles, it was really our real actors up there in the freezing cold. So there's something that makes it a little less sci-fi and makes it a little bit more like we're people, but we're in a different time period.
It gives you a you are there quality.
Just to add one more thing about Veronica. The last author we worked with was in much less of a position to have notes, and that was F. Scott Fitzgerald. And so we were certainly anxious, because the book was such a phenomenon, about meeting Veronica and how she would react. And one of the real pleasures for us, and I'm still sort of still shocked at her openness, is we had the production office in Chicago, and she would come and she would see the production designer's sketches of, and now starting to understand that 100 artisans had been hired and would start to render the things that she had made up. And as she would look at the architectural sketches, she'd always look through and she'd kind of go, oh, that's a really good idea. And it was with just sort of an openness and a respect for other creative people doing their particular work.
Thanks.
I watched the movie last night, so I don't want to compare it to other novels in our generation, but I think it's inevitable because, you know, it's targeted at teens and it's set in a dystopian future. So did you guys feel any pressure, like distinguishing Divergent from other movies at this time?
Yes. No, yeah, of course. I mean, my feeling was that I wanted to make it. It is obviously has a female heroine in a, you know, in the future, and but my feeling was that I wanted to make it obviously as different as possible than those movies, and often those we were just talking about that. But often those movies they're sort of grim and sort of gray and bleak and post-apocalyptic, and so one thing was to kind of tip it a little bit more toward, at least in the beginning, toward kind of a utopia in the beginning, and to actually shoot it in a much more luminous and light kind of way. Triss wants to be part of this society, wants to find her place in it, and so we tried to actually make it seem to be initially a society that was worth joining before you obviously start to see the cracks in all of it. So, but I think it's a very different story. She's not on the run the whole time. She's not just trying to survive. She's actually having really complex relationships with a whole variety of people, with her friends, with her parents, with her mentors, with her sort of superior officers, with people who are trying to help her, with her people who are trying to undercut her the whole time, in a kind of a real world, even though it's in the future setting.
Also, our lead character is very different in that the person in the other movie that we love and admire is very, very strong from the beginning, whereas our girl, Triss, isn't even allowed to look in the mirror when she starts off. She has a wistful longing for something that she doesn't even know she can ever grasp. So we have a story of somebody that learns not only to look at herself in the mirror, but to actually take on the smartest person in the world and win. So that's a very different kind of a story. And the other thing that's quite different, I think, is ours is an urban story, and the other one is not set in an urban environment. It's in a much more, the city's more fantastical, and the forest is the forest, so it's very different visually. But I would say the lead journey of what the character has to go through is much more like a heightened versions of things that, as Veronica said, we all go through. Who am I? And if I show people who I really am, will they hate me? Will they kill me? Or will they accept me? Will I be strong if I'm different? Will I be able to own my own strength? Those are things that the average person does think of, maybe not on the scale, but Triss has to face it. So I think it's different.
Hi, Shailene is great as the heroine. Was she always your first choice? And how many actresses did you see for the part? And Veronica, were you part of the audition process for that?
She actually always was my first choice. I had seen her just in The Descendants, actually, and had been knocked out by her. And so she was, you know, obviously you put together a list of people because sometimes your first choice isn't available and things like that. And we met her, and
that was it.
And I was pretty much, yeah.
But we all were gearing up to start a major, across America, casting search, as any responsible person would do, to try and say who's Triss, and she just totally derailed the process.
But we heard she didn't want to do it initially.
Yeah, I think she had to evaluate whether, you know, she's concerned about the franchise thing. But
Well, I also think all of that took place in a course of about 2.5 days, when you know, it was a lot to take on and scary in a way. But it really, you know, we asked her to do it on a Tuesday, and by, you know, at the end of Friday morning she was on. But I'm sure in that process, in that interim, there was a lot of discussion, but it happened really quickly.
Did Veronica?
Well, when all this casting was happening, I was working on the 3rd book in the series. And you know, writing is what I love to do. I don't make movies. This has been wonderful. It's been wonderful to be a part of, really, but I am at my core just someone who wants to write novels. So For me, it was like, I trust you guys, you know, if you like someone, I'm sure.
Well, I
they'll
think
be
we
great,
said,
but-
you know, I think once we decide, like, well, we want to go, we said to Veronica, like,
Yeah.
this is, you know, because if Veronica had said, like, you know what, I hate that person, we would, you know, we would listen to that as well.
Yeah, just
we
to-
might have been a discussion or even an argument or something like that, but, you know, we would have heard her.
Yeah, we didn't ever test, you know, how much, I don't know, how much influence I had, because they just kept saying, like, here's who we're considering, and I would be like, oh, that sounds good.
Yeah, from our point of view, there was an anxiety, because we knew these people had been born inside Veronica. So it would have been really terrible, even in sort of our own sense of the quality of the choice, if she said, that person isn't at all like Tris. And so we got over the Shailene hump, and the 4 hump was in many ways much more terrifying. Shailene, as I said, sort of emerged to all of us in a pretty strong way. For the guy, we were in trouble, and we were seeing all of the young stars in town. There was always that kind of jockeying from the major agencies of this guy's the next Steve McQueen, this guy's the next Paul Newman. And as we brought each of those guys in to read with Shailene, she blew them away. She made them seem weak. And so we kept looking, and finally we tested Theo, who, you know, in the first moment was so exactly right. And when you've tasted failure for several weeks, it's even clearer. When you keep looking, and by the way, the movie was moving forward, and you're thinking, wow, if this guy is weak or a little bit disappointing, the whole spine, the drive of the story, the propulsion wouldn't be there. So we finally chose Theo, and I'll let Lucy tell this because she tells it better, but we then had the moment in Chicago of showing Theo with, I would say, with great anxiety, because again, 4 was inside her, and she kind of went, ew, that's not 4.
Yeah, I did see the screen test for.
So we do that.
Yeah, what's the story?
Plus, we were shooting probably in 6 weeks or something like that.
Wasn't bad.
Yeah.
I hope you like it.
Yeah, so we were nervous about showing it to Veronica, we had the screen test, which we thought was fantastic, and we had introduced him to Summit and in Lionsgate, and when they first heard his name and said, who is he? We said, just go home and ask your wife about Mr. Luke. And so that we got through that hurdle, and so we were kind of nervous, a little bit like sort of, you know, meeting the bride's family or whatever it is to go show her Theo, because again, Shay, you could see the descendants and you could see she was phenomenal. There was no question about it. She'd already been vetted by the critical world, and so we showed her Theo, and he improvised in this little scene. And during the scene, he says to her, "Come here, come here." And Veronica's sitting in her chair, and we didn't know you that well then, and suddenly she gets up like this and she goes, "Go, go." And we thought, okay, this looks good. And the next thing, we didn't want to make her self-conscious, so we looked down, and I peeked over again, and she's going like this.
Chemistry. Good.
Okay. That was a big no.
And why was he so late in the process?
It's me.
Why was it so late in the process? Because
With him.
Because we were. I mean, why did he come into it so late? He's living in England. We did see people. We saw lots of people in England. We saw people in Germany. We saw people in Denmark. We saw people all over the world. I don't know why he came into it so late, but you know, it's a process that you look for names first, people who have a profile already, been some successful movies, and then at a certain point we're looking for anybody. So
it's very rare someone that talented of that age doesn't have a profile in movies. That was
And if
wonderful
you've seen
surprise.
the movie, he's incredible. He's a great actor. He's a great screen presence. He's an incredible fighter. He really has it all.
One more question. Thank you. Last question.
Hi, Veronica. Actually, I'm a big fan of your book series. It's very thoughtful and relevant to what we're going through today, the ideas of conformity and so forth, and terrors of that. But this is an interesting medium to put this book in. It's a very thoughtful film as a result. And for both you and Neil, how was it create a divergent film? It handled so many different genres at one time. Was it cumbersome at times? Was it challenging? And do you have pressure not to kind of like talk down to your audience? It's just a very thoughtful message in the film.
Well, I definitely wasn't going to. So for me, I was making it. I know it's a young adult book. I was making an adult movie.
An adult movie.
Whatever that means. They had to bring me back from the NC-17. And so, but you know, I think all those themes apply to somebody that's 16, who's 26, who's 36, 46. You know, where do I fit in the world? Who am I? You know, what's the cost? You know, am I different? And if I'm different, do I hide it? Do I try to blend in, or do I speak with my own voice? And then what's the cost of doing that? And obviously in the movie, you know, they're going to kill her. But I think it's really just a metaphor for anybody. You know, what do you go out on a limb for? Who do you speak up for? When do you choose to kind of just, you know, conform, and when do you not? So I thought all those themes, and then ultimately those are sort of personal things, and then the larger themes of, you know, how do we get along in the world with each other? How do we as a society or groups, you know, how can we ever find a system? And there is a system that starts these 5 factions in the movie that seems to be working. But how do we, and then it falls apart. And so after that, you're like, well, how do we ever find consensus? How do we ever get along and have some sort of harmony or even peace?
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.